Argument is pretty much everywhere you look. But are we actually getting any better at it, or are we just getting louder? In this explainer, we're going to break down the art of persuasion. But instead of cracking open some dusty old textbook, we're going to use a real high-stakes debate. We'll get into the mechanics of what makes an argument good and what makes one fall flat to see how these ancient tools of rhetoric are being used and, well, misused all around us today.
Wow, that quote kind of sets the stage for where we're at, doesn't it? For a lot of people, modern debate isn't really a search for truth. It's treated more like a combat sport. The goal isn't to persuade, it's to dominate, it's to humiliate. But here's the thing, it wasn't always seen that way.
So let's go way back, like to the source code. Over 2,000 years ago, Aristotle defined rhetoric not as a weapon, but as an art of discovery. Think about that. It's about finding the best possible argument for any given situation, not just shouting the loudest one. So, what are those available means he was talking about?
Well, Aristotle broke it down into 3 core pillars. You've got logos, which is your appeal to logic and cold, hard facts. Then there's pathos, the appeal to emotion. And finally, ethos, which is all about credibility and character. A really strong argument, a persuasive one, is going to use a blend of all 3. A weak one, though, that's when you start seeing people rely on rhetorical tricks instead.
And that brings us to our case study for today. It's a really fascinating exchange that happened at Cambridge University. On one side, you have a student, Tilly Midhurst, and on the other, a professional commentator, Charlie Kirk. The topic they were supposed to be debating was the role of women in society.
So this is the crucial question, right? How do these classical ideas of logos, pathos, and ethos actually play out in a modern debate? And maybe more importantly for us, how can you learn to spot when they're being twisted and turned into rhetorical traps? Let's take a look at the first one.
Okay, first up, the red herring. This is a classic diversion tactic. The name literally comes from the idea of using a smelly fish to throw hunting dogs off of a trail, and that's exactly what it does in an argument. When a debater feels like they can't win the argument they're currently in, they toss out a red herring, a totally unrelated topic, to distract everyone and change the subject.
And here you see it happen in real time. Tilly asks this very specific, substantive question about policy, but instead of answering it, Kirk immediately throws out a red herring. He pivots to a completely different and way more controversial debate about definitions. He's totally dodging her question to change the subject to something he'd rather argue about.
All right, next up is the straw man. This one is really sneaky. It's when you misrepresent what your opponent is arguing to make it sound weaker or even ridiculous. That way, it's way easier to attack. You're not actually fighting their real argument anymore. You're just knocking over this flimsy version, the straw man, that you built yourself.
So check this out. Tilly makes a very nuanced historical point about how women's dissatisfaction used to be treated as a medical problem that needed to be silenced. Kirk just completely ignores all that nuance. He twists her argument into this super simplistic, easy-to-mock straw man, that women weren't allowed to complain. He's not even trying to debate her real point, he's just scoring cheap points by knocking down a caricature he just made up. And believe me, those were just 2 examples. The debate was full of stuff like this. There was even a tactic called the Gish Gallop. That's where you overwhelm your opponent with a non-stop, rapid-fire barrage of claims, so they can't possibly respond to everything. It's all designed to create a really confusing and dizzying conversation.
I know, this all seems pretty overwhelming, right? When someone just refuses to argue in good faith and they're throwing out a constant stream of fallacies, how do you even begin to push back? Well, it turns out there's a technique for that.
The counterattack actually comes from a very, very old playbook. It's this powerful philosophical tool that's been around for more than 2,400 years. It's called reductio ad absurdum, or, put simply, reduction to the absurd.
And honestly, it's an incredibly elegant move. Instead of attacking your opponent's argument from the outside, you kind of get inside it. You basically say, okay, you know what? Let's just assume for a second that you're totally right. And then you follow their own logic until it leads somewhere completely ridiculous, or it contradicts something else they believe.
It's really a simple 3-step process. First, you accept their premise. Second, you follow the logic. And third, you show everyone the absurd conclusion it leads to. It's kind of like intellectual judo. You use their own momentum against them.
And here is a perfect example of this technique in action. Kirk's logic is this: because America had a female vice president, it must be a country that treats women well. So Tilly just accepts his premise. She says, okay, let's run with that logic. Then she applies it to Rwanda, which has the highest female representation in government in the whole world. So, by Kirk's own logic, Rwanda must be a paradise for women. That absurd conclusion shows just how weak his original argument was. It just collapses.
So, we've seen all these little tricks in a one-on-one debate, but what happens when you take these exact same techniques and scale them up? What happens when they're not being used on just one opponent, but on an entire population?
Well, that's when these rhetorical fallacies stop being just debate tactics and start becoming the building blocks of mass propaganda. The same tricks that are used to win an argument on a stage are the ones used to shape public opinion on a massive scale.
And if you look at this framework, it reveals the classic techniques. Notice how much they mirror the fallacies we were just talking about. Instead of a simple straw man, you get widespread name-calling. Instead of a red herring, you get glittering generalities. Those big, vague virtue words like freedom or strength that sound good but don't really mean anything specific. It's the same playbook, just on a much, much bigger scale.
And here is the most important point of all. This isn't just historical or academic stuff. This is what you are seeing every single day. It's in the ads you watch, it's in the headlines you read, and it is definitely all over the arguments happening in your social media feed.
So that really brings us to the big takeaway. Being able to see an argument, analyze it, and, if you need to, take it apart, isn't just some clever party trick. It is a fundamental, core skill for being a citizen in a democracy. It's how we participate, it's how we hold people in power accountable, and it's how we protect ourselves from being manipulated.
Ultimately, democracy doesn't run on good intentions. It runs on argument. So the question this all leaves us with is, in a world that is just saturated with persuasion and propaganda from every direction, are we really equipped to participate? It's definitely something to think about.